Well, let's give this another shot. I guess the video audio cut out on the previous one, so let me re-record these last few slides about reviving a tired network. At the end where it cut out, I was talking about how even if you have lost contact, if you were once connected to somebody, those connections are still a source of social capital. And there's some interesting new research that shows just how powerful those old ties maybe that are dormant could be. So a dormant tie in this research, the definition is someone you have known, but you haven't had contact with for at least 2 years. And the other thing about this research was that those ties needed to have just faded, maybe because you got moved to a different job or transferred or moved to a different city. There wasn't any conflict or cause of a rift that made you lose contact. So, just someone you had a good relationship with at one time, but you now are not in any kind of contact with. So this research study showed how valuable these ties can be, that the social capital, if you've created a good relationship with somebody, even if you've lost touch, the value is still in that connection. So in this study, what the researchers did, they did this study on a group of managers who were taking an executive education program, and the program was about social networks and social capital. And what they were told to do was to think about a problem that they were facing at work. And they were also told before they came to the first session to identify 10 people that they think could help them with that problem, who they have not had contact with for at least 2 years. So these were dormant ties. So they said, think of people in your past who you think could provide some valuable input to you in solving this problem that you have at work. And what they then did is they said, okay, the sessions for the executive education program were a couple months apart. And they said, okay, between now and when we meet again, we want you to go out and pick one of the people in your list and contact them and ask for help. And then of those 10, we're going to pick one randomly. So the researchers said, okay, you pick your choice, and of the remaining 9, we're going to pull one randomly, and you need to contact that person as well. So you can imagine probably people will pick the number 1 or number 2 person on their list because they came to mind first. Maybe they feel like those are the strongest relationships. Then when they came back, they gave them some surveys and they asked them about what happened. And what was really interesting from this research was that those people that they reconnected with, those dormant ties, provided significantly better help than the people that they had current ties with. So this was a significant difference here. And so they were better. The other thing they found was that those dormant ties, people rated the advice that they provided and the help they provided as more novel. Now, this should not come as a surprise, given what we just talked about in class about networks, that when you have contact with people who are in diverse, disconnected pockets from your normal day-to-day network ties, who tend to be more interconnected and more similar, that those are going to be a source of better, more creative information. So this confirmed it, but interestingly enough, it also confirmed it with people that you may not be in contact with, that you may have had some prior relationship, but you've kind of let that fall dormant. The other interesting things that they discovered in this research was that there was no difference. This is not statistically significant, this difference here. There was no difference in the trust, and there was no difference in what people sensed as how kind of shared or connected they felt to one another, even though at least 2 years had passed. And so I think this mirrors a lot of those situations we feel like, maybe with a college friend, a friend from high school that we were very close with. We might, not see those people sometimes for several years, but then we get together and it just feels like we pick right up where we left off. And this kind of documents the evidence that happened here, that these people, when reached out to these dormant connections, people still felt a sense of trust and sharedness and familiarity with them. So again, it just shows that if you have a good relationship, even if it's faded and you haven't had contact for quite some time, the value remains. So it's another reason to cultivate connections and cultivate ties. It's also another reason, once in a while to just try to keep those connections a little warm. If you haven't heard from somebody or connected with somebody for quite a while, but you admire them, you felt you had a really good relationship, it might be good time like once a month just to sort of think of some of those people and reach out to connect to them, and just keep that connection a little bit alive, because again, it may be even more comfortable for you. I think people felt a little bit of discomfort going to these people that they had not talked to for 2 years or more. But after they did that, they realized it actually wasn't so uncomfortable when they did it, and the people were glad to help. So the final piece of information from this research that I think was also very, very telling and interesting was that, remember I told you that the people in the program were told to pick one person themselves of the 10 they identified, and then the researchers picked the second person at random. So that means for some people they got their second or third choice, but for some people they got their 8th, 9th, or 10th choice. And you can imagine that if you had to think of 10 people, by the time you're getting out to 8, 9, or 10, those people you might feel even less connected to or even less comfortable going out to contact. But what this figure shows us is that it did not matter which person they went to. Even if they had to go to their 10th choice, the value of what they received from that person didn't vary. So this, I think, also demonstrates the idea of weak ties, right? Those people might be even more and more and more weak connections once you get out to 9 or 10, and people still got value out of those connections. Of course, they did at one time have a strong enough relationship that there was reciprocity and people were willing to help when asked. But this was also kind of a surprising piece of information for the researchers doing this study, because they kind of hypothesized or expected that those kind of first people you identify, the relationships would be the strongest and the quality and the value would be there and provided. But in fact, quite deep into these dormant ties, the connection still provided valuable information, and it didn't trail off at all based on kind of how far out or how far down the list the person was. So in conclusion then, to these now 2 videos, there's a lot of different pieces of information to think about with your network, but among those things is consideration of the structure, where you are, how central you are, if you are seated in those brokerage or structural holes position, and to look for those, to pay attention to the network and recognize, in your organization and outside your organization, who's connected and who's not, and where can you sit in a bridging role so that you have some power. In the other video, I talked about the power of information, right? That network position can give you more power. So think about structure. Think about density, which is also a feature of the structure, that you want to have lower density, especially in your personal and strategic networks, so that you get variety, diversity of perspectives. You want to have, in terms of the content of the people, you want people who are different from yourself. That includes different levels of the organization, so superiors, peers, subordinates, but people who are actually different from you demographically as well, people who are different from you in expertise and function and background. It's important to have those kinds of diverse ties to give you access to creative, novel information. And, to have the kind of antenna and radar out politically to understand kind of how you're seen in the organization and tap into some of that private information that might help you, avoid being blindsided by initiatives that somebody else is taking on and you would otherwise not be aware of. Remember that you have to manage your operational network, your personal network, and your strategic network. And finally, you have to be thinking ahead and thinking about the network you need 1 and even 2 career steps down the road, and taking the insight excuse me, from Heidi again, the network that works in one domain, one industry, or one kind of environment or context may not be very helpful to you if you move and make a significant career change, or if you're trying to do something outside of the workplace in some volunteer capacity, the network you have may not serve you. So it's important to also recognize why having diversity in your network can help, because if you move, those moves might be a little smoother if you already have a fairly diversified network. So all in all, these are some things to think about. And I think I highly recommend making this something that's on your calendar, whether that's once a month you think about something, you think about it quarterly, you take the feedback from class and you evaluate where you think you need to build, and you make some conscious efforts to do that. And all in all, that will support your capacity for power and influence now and in your future for your career.